In terms of what you can build on those, I know it varies county by county, but where you're at, so if you buy, like, why'd you decide to build three on that first 4 acres, and then how do you decide, like, on 15 acres how many you'll build?
Yeah, it's all based off zoning, exactly what you just said. So
Okay.
that first parcel, you could only build three before you needed to get something called a special, it was a special use permit, but a short-term rental complex permit, which I've gotten before. I've stood in front of the county and gotten some of the bigger projects approved. But it takes a lot of time. And especially the road leading up to those properties is a little narrow. So I wouldn't feel comfortable putting 10 properties up there and bringing potentially 30-40 cars up that small road, especially because it's in sort of a neighborhood where there's other houses. Yeah, but when it comes to like the bigger stuff, zoning is probably the biggest thing I look for outside of like access to like ease of access to the property.
So with the 15 acres, then is that zoned for a short-term rental complex then, and you can kind of build as many as you want, or is there a certain limit?
Yeah, so anything in my county over 3 units requires a short-term rental complex permit. Here in my county, if you're in open use zoning, so again, you just have to get familiar with your zoning laws. It's pretty easy. You just call someone and set a meeting there instead of going back and forth on emails. But the 15 acres that we purchased that we're going to put 9 cabins on, that one, it's open use land. It requires a short-term rental complex permit. That took a couple months to get with the county. And yeah, it was like, you can build in open use land here, anything, you can build over 10 units without even getting a hotel permit. Which is actually another strategy that I haven't really played with too much, but I know I've talked to some people that to skirt short-term rental laws in the area, you can just get a hotel permit if the project is big enough, which is crazy.
Yeah, I know there's tends to be some other strings that go along with the hotel permit. Like,
right.
I was walking through one the other day that, is technically a hotel, and he was saying he has to like send his sheets out to be sanitized. Like,
interesting. So like that's part of the rules that has interesting.
Yeah. There's like there's different standards, I guess, and inspections and also taxes too.
Right.
His taxes were a lot higher than the property right next door, which was considered an Airbnb and didn't have to adhere to that. So
which is interesting because hotels can now advertise on Airbnb. Like there's a section for them. So it's like it's practically the same thing now.
Yeah. Yeah, the line is definitely getting blurrier and blurrier. But that's really interesting. I think that's the thing probably that is the most confusing, because the rules change in terms of like the land usage laws. But in terms of what you built, so you mentioned A-frame. So are these considered tiny homes, or are these actual houses that are permitted as houses? And I guess if it's a complex, it'd have to be sold as a whole complex, or maybe individual lots. Can you explain how that works?
So I mean, I'm a huge believer of always thinking of the exit in mind when you first start, no matter what business you're in. I know it's a little bit morbid to believe that, like, okay, my business is going to end one day, but you have to think of the exit in mind, especially with real estate. So I try to build as many exits as possible inside of these properties. You can, depending on how comfortable you are with risk and how much capital you have. I like to build permanent foundation stick built houses that could be lived in long term if needed be. So like I can sell them off to a family, I can sell them off to a couple. The first cabin was only 830 square foot, but it has a full bathroom with a shower and a toilet, obviously working toilet with septic system, has a full kitchen, living room, dining area. So I like to I don't like to go over 2,000 square foot. I've purchased cabins that are bigger than that. But when it comes to development, anywhere between 400 to 1,800 square foot, say 2,000, under 2,000, with full kitchens and full bathrooms. Because if I do need to sell them, someone can just get a normal home loan on them. And same thing with developing these larger properties. We do subdivide the land, where it's like we do 2 properties per lot. So it's a primary and an accessory dwelling unit, where it's like you'll usually have a big version of the house and then a smaller version of the house.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because that's when we've got 30 35 acres behind me back here that I'm sitting
Beautiful.
outside right now for people who are not watching this and they're listening to the audio, and that's why the audio is not as good as when I'm typically inside in the studio. But yeah, we've got 35 acres that we're planning to do some sort of development like that on. And the challenge that we got into when we started looking at this is all the options. It's like you can put A-frames, you could put tiny house, you could put cabins, you could put Airstreams, you could do all these different, and some of them work, most of them cash flow and work well. It's like, but how do you optimize it to the best option? And then at the end of the day, does it have equity? Because if you build something that it just depreciates in value over time, then, that's, even if it costs less and cash flows well, you're not, building wealth in that property anymore. So that's what I always think about too. So that's a great way to structure it, where you've got the 2 properties per lot, and you can sell those off then if you ever need to.
Yeah, I think in my county, depending on the zoning, you can do up to 2 accessory dwelling units, like 2 mother-in-law suites detached. But those mother-in-law suites still have full kitchens and full bathrooms like normal houses. But if we were just to sell off one of those lots, I mean, that's like an investor's dream. If there was already like some sort of income attached to it where it was rented out for 3, 4, 5 years, and it's like, boom, here's 2, 3 short-term rentals on the lot like that are already cash flowing.
Yeah. And what's your sweet spot in terms of bedrooms, or maybe even amenities that you offer?
Yeah, so I like to do it a minimum of 4 people. I don't like doing 2 people. That might look like a queen or a king loft with a queen pull-out couch. I don't like to. We have a very beautiful luxury log cabin that's 3,200 square foot that can sleep 14 people. Those aren't necessarily higher maintenance. It's just people don't really plan 14-person trips on a whim. So usually that when you get into properties, I would say anything over 8 or 10 people, there's more lead time for people to rent, right? So I like to stick within the 4 to 8, 4 to 6 people sleeping. So usually if it's 6 people, it's usually 2 bedrooms or 2 sleeping areas and a nice queen pull-out couch, which is a key right there, a nice queen pull-out couch.
Yeah, those can vary in quality, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And what's your cost on building something like that?
Yeah, so prior to COVID, it was anywhere between 180 to 200 a square foot. Now it's probably closer to 230 to 260 a square foot. So that really it's a challenge, but it's fun because you have to completely optimize the floor plan. Like there's no wasted space. You can't have like 500 extra square feet of something if you don't need it, right? The bedrooms have to be the perfect size and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, this, like you asked about the sweet spot earlier, like anywhere between 800 square foot, 900 square foot, if it's an open floor plan, does really well right now, especially with everything, all the costs still being a little bit high.
Okay. And does that doesn't include the land, that's just the cost to build?
Yeah. So yeah, that doesn't, if you're getting into the 260 range, that probably would include the cost to build. It depends on what you're doing. So we try to get away with like digging, like we're doing septic and well on most of these properties. So we try to get away with doing maybe 1 well instead of building 2 or digging 2 or 3. So land costs, yeah, that doesn't include land costs if it's like 220 a square foot, closer to 260 a square foot if you're counting like land costs and stuff.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So rough math then, you build a A-frame that's 900 square foot for about $200,000.
About, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then once you're done, is it appraised like a regular house?
Yeah. So, and if you decide to go the A-frame route, one thing to keep in mind is that they are appraised. So it depends what bank you're getting, right? Because we recently did a cash out refinance with a bank that specifically does short-term rentals, and they were doing. We were allowed to do an income appraisal compared to just an appraised value. So it depends what bank you're using. But one thing about A-frames is since you have that crazy pitched roof, a lot of the square footage actually doesn't count towards the overall square footage because it has to be like 6 or 7 feet high. So they appraise like they sometimes they're appraised like normal houses. Sometimes it's income approach. I feel like if I sold my A-frame on the open market, it would get way more than what it appraised for, just because of how much it's made the last like 4 years.
Yeah. Income approach. I haven't been able to get that on any of my short-term rentals. It's always they're comparing it to other single families in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and you're like, it's an A-frame. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And even for just regular houses, like you're comparing it to like the guy next door that is not making anything from the house. And so if you're selling it as a business asset, the buyer is really looking at how much income it's bringing in. And so income approach makes a lot more sense. So from that standpoint, then, are you getting appraisals that are just like through the roof?
They are. I mean, just we did do a comparable and an income approach one. The comparable one was interesting because we built for about 200, 220 if you include furnishings. And the appraisal had came in at 350. I personally think that I could sell that thing for 500, especially now with the market correction. It brought in 84,000 in gross last year and netted just under 50,000. And that's just a small little property. I essentially say it's like a starting salary practically for someone. Imagine if you had 3 of those, which is what I teach in my courses. Like 3 is the goal. You get 3 netting you 45, 50,000 a year, you're solid.